We've got several things to try to accomplish. Before we do, ask Representative Jones if he would to say a prayer for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May we bow our heads? Father God, we give you all the honor and all the praise. We thank you for the gathering of this committee. We want you to bless our chairman, our members, and the people that are here involved in the state of Georgia. We ask that all blessings come through you and that we remain steadfast in your name and committed to your cause. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. We'll call the meeting to order. First on our agenda today is resolutions, and we'll ask for a committee report from our subcommittee chairman, Representative Dempsey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to report to you that all of the roads were documented and rolled into H.R. 25, so they passed unanimously and are ready for you.
All right, thank you. Is there any committee members have any questions about the roads that we have on the list to name this year? All right, hearing none, this time it would be appropriate for a motion to do pass.
So moved.
All right, motion do pass. Do we have a second? All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of moving H.R. 25 with do pass, signal by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. All right, H.R. 25 is on to rules. All right, next I want to talk about HB 481. This is a piece of legislation that we actually passed last year out of the House as part of a broader bill dealing with unmanned aircraft. As you know, this House had a study committee that met for a year, and then we did a lot of work on drones last year. The governor had vetoed the legislation and wanting to wait till the FAA came out with some more recommendations. The governor did, through executive order, appoint a drone study group, drone commission. And there are several members of that commission here today. That's chaired by the GEMA director, Mr. Bryson. But I don't believe he's here. But if he is, we'll have him speak, but I don't think he is. Before you have a substitute House Bill 481, it's LC 297489S. This is their recommendation that came out of that group thus far. And this basically takes the preemption language exactly the way it was passed last session out of the House and out of the Senate and puts it into this new House Bill 481. The intent of this is to make sure that we do not have 500 plus cities and 159 plus counties trying to regulate unmanned aircraft. This is a growing technological industry in our state, and we want to reserve that ability to regulate it to the state and then ultimately to the FAA. The only exception to that is there in the legislation starting on line 18. If there's already legislation or an ordinance in place, then that would be considered grandfathered. And also they can regulate unintentional landings. And that would be on line 25 through 27. I've talked to ACCG and to GMA. They're not going to oppose the legislation. I believe they're here today. If they have any comments or if there's any other individuals that signed up to speak on the substitute House Bill 481, this would be the appropriate time to hear from you. If you would, just come up to the podium and give us your name and your organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justin Kernan with GMA. And as you mentioned, we're not going to oppose the bill. We appreciate the fact that local governments will maintain the ability to control landing and taking off on municipal-owned property. And there are certain FAA regulations or things that local governments can apply through the FAA to have no-fly zones or control the airspace above such properties. So we thank you for all of the work that has been done on this legislation for the last couple of years.
All right, thank you. Is there any questions of GMA? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't believe I have anyone else signed up to speak on this bill. Does the committee members have any questions relating to House Bill 481? Seeing none, is there a motion? All right, we have a motion. Do pass. Do we have a second? Motion and second do pass. Any other discussion? All right, if none, we're voting on do pass or substitute to House Bill 481 LC 297489S. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Any opposed, same sign. All right, the bill passes and moves on to rules. Thank you. All right, next, we want to call up House Bill 506. This is a piece of legislation that was introduced late in the session. You should have this legislation in your packet, and we're going to ask Representative Chairman Tom Taylor, Chairman of the MARTOC Committee, to come forward and present the legislation. Chairman Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring for you House Bill 506. We're working off of LC 391620. Basically, this bill allows MARTA in a very limited way, and not regarding the transportation issues, but just the operation of concessions within the MARTA system. As they expand, a little history on this, basically the MARTA Act's been around for close to 50 years now, and is very rigid in the contracting provisions for this that are kind of outdated. Basically, because of the revenue structure then, any concessions that were being bid on had to be awarded to the highest bidder to maximize the revenue. What this bill does is simply takes that section, relaxes that, and instead of an invitation to bid, which is a very rigid structure, it allows you to do a request for proposal, basically an RFP, where you can, you're not structured into, you can have people come in with more innovative solutions. You know, if they know a better way to do it, they're not stuck within those confines. And of course, basically, it takes away the language of mandatory awarding it to the highest bidder. Just gives MARTA flexibility in contracting these things. And this can be like vending machines, coffee kiosks. We have fresh fruit and vegetable markets going on in MARTA right now. And it just helps expand that as MARTA has expanded since the 70s when this was written. I know Representative Jones has a couple an amendment to this, just a slight text change with that, and I'm fine with that. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions. This is very simple, and it also limits the scope of this to the management of MARTA to $200,000 in a particular bid.
All right, do we have some questions of Chairman Taylor? All right, Representative Jones.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have the substitute. I didn't see it in my folder. I have a copy of the.
This is LC 391620. I've got an extra copy.
Yes, can I have it? Just want to make sure.
John, if you can reach in my folder,
I
the
did.
manila folder right there, I've got one.
Chairman
right on
Taylor, we're not working off a substitute, are we?
No.
Okay, there's no substitute.
John, I've got two more copies right there.
Three, I believe he has the
Okay,
correct.
so-
Pause just a second. Chairman Taylor, I just want to confirm, we're working off LC 391620. There's no substitute.
That's correct, sir.
All right, there's no
Okay,
substitute.
okay, got it. Thank you. Mr. Chair, Representative Taylor's in my delegation, and he did bring this before us, and I had some questions, and he and I were able to talk with the folks who are here representing MARTA. I understand what they're trying to do. They want to allow or provide for them to be more creative with their bidding process, and they were kind of blocked in. I just have a friendly amendment that we discussed. Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to go to the heart of that, and that's starting on line 39.
Let me just say that what we'll do is you go ahead and speak on the issue, and then when at the appropriate time, we'll take amendments, but just go ahead and talk about the concern you have.
Okay. Mr. Chair, my concern that we've worked out dealt with when the language was struck, line 39, for example, where it has competitive bidding process. I just want to insert some new language at the appropriate time, but it would read, starting with line 39, a competitive and responsible process. And then the next one we talked about on line 42, again, a competitive and responsible process is already inserted there. And then on line 44, the same thing where it says such competitive and responsible process. And that's the extent of it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Representative
And as I
Jones.
said, we've talked about this ahead of time, and I'm fine with those friendly amendments.
Okay. Any other questions of Chairman Taylor? Chairman Taylor, do you have anybody here from MARTA that would
So
like to
I've
be
got,
heard on this?
Rhonda, do you want to speak to the bill?
Come up, if you would. Just give us your name and your position, please.
Thank you, Chairman Tanner and committee members. My name is Rhonda Briggins. I'm the Senior Director of External Affairs and one of the head lobbyists for MARTA here at the Capitol. This piece of legislation, we've been trying to work and really make our stations no different than what you see in D.C., a Union Station. That's what we're doing, where we will have the ability to go in and really build out our vending program. Currently, we have our first phase, which is just soda machines and that type of things and water machines within the vending within our stations. But we want to get to the point, just like we are in our TOD program, where we expand that, where it's a little more robust. And currently under this process, it limits our ability to really look at competitive organizations that have done this work in a way that will yield a profit, but also in a way that will bring a great product to our stations and to our customers. And that's all we're trying to do.
So in essence, you're going to be looking at more than just price. You're
More
going to be
than
looking
just
at
price.
the total
Yes, sir.
package.
Correct.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions of MARTA? All right, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I have a sign-up list here. I don't think anyone has signed up to speak on this issue, but if there is anyone in the audience that would like to be heard on this issue, now would be the appropriate time to come forward to the podium. All right, hearing none. Anything else to add, Chairman Taylor?
Just that I'm fine with the friendly amendments, and if we can proceed, and would appreciate your favorable consideration.
Okay, thank you. All right, the posture we'll be in is we will now open it up for motions on the bill, and if we get a motion and a second to do pass, then we will open that up for any amendments. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Mr. Chairman, I know this just came to your calendar the last minute, but obviously it's important, and I'd like to be recognized again to add the friendly amendments and at the appropriate time to make a motion do pass, because it does need to move on because we're getting late in the session. So if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, again, I have 3 friendly amendments.
All right, let's, first of all, we'll take a motion do pass. If we get a motion and a second, then we'll open it up for amendments. So
moved.
all right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? All right, motion and a second do pass LC 391620, and now be the appropriate time for amendments. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Mr. Chair, on line 39, a competitive and insert the 2 words and responsible. And then on line 42, again, you want to insert the words and responsible after competitive. And then on line 44, you want to insert the 2 words and responsible. I said responsible and responsible process. So the 3 words, 3 different, Mr. Chair, line 39 adding and responsible, line 42 adding and responsible, and line 44 we adding and responsible after competitive, the word competitive.
Okay, so we have a motion, Representative Jones, to amend LC 391620 on line 39 after the word competitive and insert and responsible. Line 42 after the word competitive, insert and responsible. And on line 44 after the word competitive, insert the words and responsible. Legislative Council. Line 4. Representative
Did I
Jones,
miss
line 4, the very front of the bill.
Okay, I missed that one. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Good catch. Yeah.
So also on the motion, it would be after competitive on line 4 and responsible. You good with that, Legislative Council? All right, do we have a second for the amendment? Do we have a second for the amendment? All right, we have a motion and a second on the amendment. Is there discussion on the amendment? Number 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to understand where responsible is defined. I understand competitive find somewhere.
Go ahead, Representative
If I
Jones.
can, Madam Representative, I don't think, is competitor defined in there as well? Exactly. Responsible, Madam Representative, is sometimes when they're doing a process, they're making a selection, rather than always being able to go to the highest bidder or the lowest bidder, to allow them the flexibility to do a full evaluation and a comprehensive evaluation, they'd like for the bids to be responsible, competitive and responsible. Actually, those two terms kind of go together, and that's pretty frequently used in the procurement process, both competitive and responsible.
Let me ask this question, Legislative Council. Legislative Council, do you have any concerns from a legal perspective with the term responsible?
I haven't seen it often as far as contract awards, and maybe Marta can speak to better knowing how their system that they're intending, but don't see it often. But necessarily means wrong.
Representatives from MARTA, would you have anything you'd like to add to that? Go ahead and come around to the podium so we're in full committee that's being recorded. We'll make sure people can hear you.
I don't foresee it being a problem, so whatever you all decide, I think we're okay with it.
Okay, thank you. All right, is there any other questions on the amendment or any other discussion on the amendment? All right, hearing none, we're going to now vote the amendment, the Jones Amendment, inserting the words "and responsible" on line 4 after competitive, and responsible after competitive on line 39, and responsible after competitive on line 42, and after competitive on line 44. So that's the motion, and we'll call the question. All those in favor of the Jones Amendment signal by aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Just for clarity, we're going to take a hand vote. All those in favor signal by raising your hand. All right. All those opposed? All right. Motion carries. The amendment's adopted. So now going to the main motion, which is due pass of House Bill 506, LC 391620, as amended by this body. All those in favor of that signal by saying aye. Any opposed? All right, ayes have it. Motion is approved. So House Bill 506 is amended by this body, is approved, and will go on to rules. All right. Next, we don't think Subcommittee Chair Harrell has arrived, but Subcommittee Chair Harrell has been having several official subcommittee meetings and has been meeting numerous times with other representatives and members of the community dealing with the autonomous vehicle. And I believe that at this point we would like to take this up in full committee, have a discussion, and see where we are with this legislation. The bill is House Bill 248, I believe, and it is being carried by Representative Trey Kelly. So, Representative Kelly, I would ask you to come up to the podium and present the legislation to us. And for the record, when you get up there, Representative Kelly, tell us what LC number we're working off of.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm working off LC 391614 ERS. This is a measure aimed after a lot of work that we've put in subcommittee and outside to try and lay the framework for autonomous vehicles to come to Georgia's roadways. At the beginning, I just want to take a minute, even though they're not here, so y'all make sure y'all tell them I bragged on them. Chairman Harrell did a great job in subcommittee in helping us drive this conversation and the work that's been put in, certainly by Chairman Setzler. Certainly appreciate their work and the industry support of everyone working together, navigating the complexities of laying a framework for this emerging, exciting technology. I think I've talked a little bit to the committee, at least in subcommittee, about my interest in autonomous vehicles. When I was first elected, or before I was first elected, I'd watched a video that many of you may have seen now. It's a famous video from Google, and it showed a gentleman riding in an autonomous vehicle to do all his errands for the day. He rode through the fast food line. He went by his dry cleaners, did a couple other little stops. And at the end of the video, you saw the gentleman get out, and he had a cane. He was legally blind. And it just really struck home to me that this technology was helping him gain back part of his mobility in life and being independent. And that hit me hard because I grew up with a grandmother who was blind her whole life. And I saw how she had to rely on people to get places, the doctor's visits or to the store and things like that. And I saw how great this technology would be, and I've been committed ever since being in the legislature to try and help work with that development. Several years ago, I chaired a study committee on the technology and start looking at the issues that may develop, and many of them we've addressed in this measure. At the end of that study committee, we thought, this was 3 or 4 years ago, that we felt like that it wasn't time in the technology, the way the technology was advancing, to put forth any legislation. We did not want to do anything to hamper the growth of this industry in Georgia. So at the time, we held off and have fought back several pieces of legislation over the last couple of years. But I feel like the climate is right for Georgia to go down this road, I guess you could say. So if I can just walk you through the committee substitute that we're working off, and maybe highlight some of the key parts. And I know we're going to have some testimony from from interested parties here. So first, one of the first things is with all legislation, you usually have your definition section, but here we're really starting from scratch. So we start by defining what an automated driving system is and how that ties into what a dynamic driving task is. That really speaks to how, and that's really the system for how these cars move throughout the roadways. Another important definition that I want to point out is minimal risk condition. I want you to go in and focus your attention on line 35 because that there's a provision in the bill where we talk about if something were to if the car should be experiencing maybe a maintenance issue or had something interfere with its operation, the car must be designed to go into what's called a minimal risk condition. So I want to point you to the definition of minimal risk condition there. If you'll skip with me to section 3 of the bill, that's really kind of the meat of the legislation, and it talks about several things. First on line 90, it makes clear that autonomous vehicle can operate on the roadways without a human driver being present in the vehicle, as long as, if you go down to 95, they still are able to comply with the rules of the road in Chapter 6 and Chapters 8 of this title here in Chapter 40. We have on line 105, we talk about the liability limits. It is a elevated level of insurance. That was something that I feel like is important in this conversation, is that we make sure that should something go wrong with these vehicles, that Georgians are certainly protected and have insurance pool to pull from. Finally, kind of a big part that I think is on line 113, where it says that it makes clear that even though the car may be autonomous, that the individuals who are riding in it, if there is a human in there, that they still must comply with Georgia seatbelt laws. Mr. Chairman, I know there's probably some questions. I know there's going to be some input from the industry here, but I'll be glad to stand for questions. And if y'all ask me really hard one, I may call on an expert or somebody to help me clarify it.
You mentioned the insurance coverage in line 105 there. Tell us, because it says they'll have the commercial, but tell us what those limits are.
And I want to, my intention here, and I wanted to make sure with Jenna, because we've had several versions of this bill going back and forth, even to this morning. My goal was to have a $750,000 limit, so we're probably going to need to make a change here. I don't know if we've got that in there. we're going to need to. That's going to be an amendment that I want the committee to consider. Right now, the limousine portion, which is on line 107, is a $300,000 policy, if I believe that's correct. I think it's important that we take that up to $750, and I'll just lean on the committee in general on how y'all want to properly draft that. And I also feel like as the technology progresses, we'll see it develop, and so we've talked about the idea of a sunset to this measure as well. And so I would be glad to entertain a sunset of maybe 3 years to when it then could be reduced down to the limousine levels. But I think starting off, at least for the first 3 years, we need to be at the $750,000 level, and I'll just rely on the committee and Jenna to help me with drafting that as an amendment.
And from talking with you on this legislation, I think the intent of the increase, because currently under Georgia law, the minimum policy requirements for a normal vehicle is $25,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the concern would be that we want to try to make sure that the people who are utilizing these vehicles with this new technology on the roadways have adequate coverage. Is that correct?
Adequate coverage, and also just from the practicality of it, when something goes wrong with one of these vehicles the first time, and there is an injury, there's going to be some debate on what caused the malfunction, where the that resulted in the injury. And I feel like there's going to probably be an attorney involved in this somewhere, and you're gonna eventually have what's known as a battle of the experts. Everyone's going to go out and hire their experts, and the injured party is going to need to probably expend a significant amount of money hiring experts. And I want to make sure that there's a level that allows them to recoup their costs on that.
Representative Williams said there's an attorney involved in everything. So I just
and no, we certainly don't want to mess with that.
All right. I think we have a question, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. I caught most of what you were saying. I particularly caught, and thank you for the $750,000. I must admit to you, my wife thinks I'm worth a whole lot more than that. But my question...
Even though she does all the work around the house?
Of course, man. But I'm an encourager. My question, excuse, but I'm relatively antiquated. I still use a BlackBerry. So stay with me a minute, and maybe one of your experts will handle this later. But you see, I'm struggling to get there. Driverless.
Yeah.
I'm really struggling because a couple of weeks ago, in a relatively new car, my wife was driving on Fort Stewart, and all the sophisticated computers went out in the middle of a red light with traffic all around her. I know this must be good technology, but you have to make me feel better about the fact that my grandmother, who was by no means a highly educated person, but a lot of wisdom, she said, son, if man makes it, it can fail. And I don't know if the 750 is enough if we start talking about that, but bring me up to date on some technology. And see, I live down in the rural, and I'm concerned down there. My goodness, man, we hit deer all the time. This thing ain't gonna hit a deer on Fort Stewart. And, just tell me about the safety and what we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So this technology right now is being tested and has pilot programs going all around the country. I would probably underestimate it if I even tried, but I think several of the manufacturers can boast that they've gone thousands and thousands of miles with little to no malfunctions. There's error in everything, and it certainly, things can go wrong. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that 94% of all wrecks are caused by human error. Georgia is just from last year to this previous year, the deaths on Georgia roadways went up 33%. That's one of the highest in the nation. There's people who are dying on our roads today, and I had an opportunity to ride in a semi-autonomous vehicle a few weeks ago down 75, and you can watch how the technology interacts with around it, and the reaction time is certainly much quicker than that, or than you or I could react. And it's amazing, and it's tough to trust that technology. Of course, no one would be forced into one of these. But my rationale behind going to the 750,000 was that's the level that we require tractor trailers today. I think those are pretty dangerous, but that's the public policy that we set at the state is $750,000, and that's kind of just where I came up with my number there. Recognizing that the technology is going to continue to adapt and progress.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman, and with all due respect, I understand that if this technology is available, and well, it is available.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, our biggest need in Georgia from an employment standpoint, truck drivers.
Mm-hmm.
How long before this technology eliminates a great deal of the need of the jobs of truck drivers? And don't get me wrong, I know I'm sounding like the guy who was defending the horse and buggy, but so I know there's some things that are inevitable, but I do have some concerns there.
So the technology, I think, probably before you get the full kind of implementation, it's probably you're probably in the 7 to 10 year range before it's at that level. In one of their kind of pilot, projects, kind of one of the demonstrations, you talk about this year, Anheuser-Busch drove, I don't know, it was several hundred miles to deliver a truckload of beer with an autonomous truck. So that's that's certainly happening, and hopefully those people will continue to adapt their skills in the marketplace, and it's just a sign of technology as it's coming. That's just the way people have to adapt.
All right, thank you. Representative Taylor.
I've got a couple questions. Am I on?
Yes. Are you number 9?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. A couple of questions to the author of the bill, please. I had similar concerns that we've already discussed. Will this policy be written as a livery? Because that's technically, when you have no driver, it is now a livery. And I know we've had these conversations in public safety about Lyft and Uber, who are not the owners of the vehicle and liability. And I too wonder if maybe it should be considered at $1 million just because you don't know. So that was one of my concerns. The other is, I know that we can, I'm sure there's some way, and I'd like somebody to explain it, how they know when the light's red and where the stop sign is. Logistically, how are they doing that? And how are they going to know when that deer is going to jump out?
Well,
That's one of my concerns.
So I'm going to try and I'll address the first question about the insurance. 750 was the number I felt comfortable with. This committee, y'all certainly have the pleasure of taking any action y'all do. I mean, I think the first implementation of this will be through kind of a fleet-based model. So I'll allow y'all to debate that. I felt comfortable at 750,000. When you talk about the technology, it's really amazing, and I'd be glad to invite you to go try it out with me again next time I do it. But it's really amazing. They use what's called LiDAR technology, which is a very high level radar, sonar type system in the car, and eventually the more of these cars that are on the road, they'll also talk to each other. But they use some very impressive, what's, like I said, LiDAR technology that can sense and detect. Just like me or you don't know a deer's about to jump out in front of us. The car won't know either, but the reaction time of the computer in the car will be much faster than you or I can process, and that's where I think one of the key safety aspects comes in.
You mentioned about Anheuser-Busch, and they've already tried it. Are they also going to replace the Clydesdale?
I hope not.
Be
They may replace the driver, but the horses are staying. All right, Representative Garner, is that you? Do you have?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very curious about this too, and I have a couple of questions. One is the quick reactions. So I think that's clearly a safety asset, except I might be behind this car and my reactions probably are not quite so quick. What procedure do they have to compensate for that?
For a driver who's following too closely for conditions.
It's called a traffic citation.
I think that certainly this technology will reduce the number of accidents and the number of deaths on Georgia roadways. Until you eliminate all humans being in control of their cars and driving, I don't think you'll ever be able to eliminate all of them. But I would just encourage everyone to maintain the proper distance for safety under our rules of the road that currently exist.
But do they have some special lights that go off, or, I mean, brake lights certainly are clues to us. Do they have anything in addition to that that you know?
No, most of them, the ones that you can see that are being tested on the roads today, some you can identify because of the style of the vehicle. You know, Google has one that's particularly is kind of. It doesn't look like a traditional car, so when they're testing it out in California, you can tell that's one. But other manufacturers are integrating this technology into cars, just like they have other safety features like cruise control or like seat belts, things like that. So most of the goal is to have them look like the cars that you and I drive around in now.
The other question has to do with the amount of insurance, and so there's personal injury issues, but there's also the legal issues, and the companies that are going to be owning this car, they're going to have deep pockets in terms of legal analysis.
Right.
But I might not. So is that enough for me to get the legal representation that I'm going to need in order to?
If you own one yourself, own the car yourself. Oh.
If I'm injured by motor vehicle.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, as someone who does, civil litigation, represent a lot of injured people, I think so. And that's kind of where I was coming from and where I made my analysis. I think it's important when you talk about that. There's functions in Georgia law to get outside of insurance policy limits, and if people are acting in bad faith in a situation like this, you would still be able to explore that with a manufacturer, someone who does, the key to insurance is shielding your protecting your assets in uncertain situations. So I think while we're setting this as a floor at $750,000 as a minimum, I think most of your larger manufacturers will carry much higher policy because they want to shield their other assets.
I won't. And I have to hire a lawyer to talk with your expert.
Yeah, if an autonomous vehicle caused injury to your person, you would be able to pursue the insurance policy that they have purchased. You don't pursue. I mean, there's times where you go after what's called uninsured motorist. You're underinsured, but you would first go after their policy, which they would have purchased at that level.
All right, thank you. All right, I believe that's all the questions we have. Representative Kelly, do you have anything else to add before we listen to the speakers?
He's walked in. Both of them have walked in the room now. So in case y'all don't tell him, I'm just going to say it again. I certainly appreciate all the hard work that Chairman Harrell did in subcommittee to help with this, and certainly the yeoman's work that's been done by Chairman Setzler. He's been someone I've worked with on autonomous vehicle language since really first getting up here, and I appreciate the input he's had. And I know that both of them may have some input, but I'll be glad to just sit around over here behind that pole, and as other speakers come up, and we'll be glad to give input as y'all want.
All right, thank you. And just to remind the speakers and the audience and the committee, our posture today is we're going to hear from the speakers. We're going to take discussion by the committee. We do not plan to take a vote on the bill you have in front of you. If we can reach what we feel as a committee, some level of consensus, then we will ask the author to work with the subcommittee to try to draft a updated substitute and then have a meeting sometime tomorrow during one of our breaks. If we do not get to that path, there is another bill over in the Senate that is moving and is in rules now, and if that passes the Senate, then that will come over to this committee, and that will give us the remainder of the session to continue to perfect this. But it's the chair's desire to make sure when we move this legislation out of this committee that we have covered all the issues and concerns that both the committee has and the author has with this bill. So Representative Kelly, if you'll stay close, we may have some additional questions, but we'll go ahead and go to our list, and we got Emily Bagwell first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Bagwell, if you'll come to the podium and just tell us who you represent.
Yes, sir. And if it is okay, Mr. Chairman, Bobby Potter, another insurance person, will come up.
Yes, that'd be good. Thank you.
We're in the insurance world. We're kind of accused of moving in packs. We really don't. Each of us represent different aspects of the insurance world. As Chairman Tanner said, I'm Emily Bagwell. I represent the Georgia Association of Property and Casualty Insurance Companies. That's a trade association comprised primarily of domestic insurance companies. I also represent Allstate Insurance Company.
So I'm Bobby Potter, and I represent State Farm and the American Insurance Association, which is another trade association with a whole bunch of insurers interested in this issue.
And we have just a few issues that we'd like to bring to the committee's attention. The first being, I think, do you want to talk about data first?
Sure. I'll make kind of two summary comments. This has been a moving target, and there are folks within State Farm and the American Insurance Association and Allstate and other groups nationally that are trying to keep up with this, and some react in response to or stay with it. So there are two kind of summary items that I would suggest based on a conference call I had on the way to this meeting. Is presently there is no, at least to the knowledge of the folks I'm talking with, no insurance product on the market that covers this. This bill requires insurance, or it requires self-insurance, and really at this early stage what you'll hear from are the big players that have, as Representative Gardner said, deep pockets. But in terms of pure insurance in the next level, that's the first item I would reference, that there really is no insurance product available for that. And the second piece from a summary standpoint is where that tends to come from is actuarial data. And the catch with developing data is the folks that deal with this would say that's proprietary information. They don't want to share that data. But in the event of a vehicular accident that involves one of these vehicles and involves one of Emily's insureds or ours, there's a witness in the driver vehicle that would give information to a police report, as occurs every day. But the other vehicle is the witness. So where does that come from? And right now, as in this bill, there's a reference that requires notification to the law enforcement agency that an accident has occurred. But there's nothing beyond that as to the data, the speed, the direction, what was happening. Was the light red? Was it green? Was there somebody crossing the road? Any of that data is not available. So those are the concerns that I'm hearing from our folks that I wanted to express to you all today. And I would say we appreciate it. We sat down with Representative Setzler after a little conversation on the ropes for about an hour, trying to work on some issues that, and I haven't touched that one. That deals with what or who is actually operating the AV at the time, and that will get into some GTLA issues.
So more specifically, building on what Mr. Potter had said, we had developed some language that gets at some of this. There's what I call the 270 sections, and that's the rules of the road that talk about what you have to do when there's an accident. And it's pretty specific in Georgia law. It does contemplate that there's a person behind the wheel. But I think that by adding some language that says something to the effect of when the person when the car contacts local law enforcement, they will communicate that information required by such code sections, and that the fully autonomous vehicle will remain at the accident site until they are otherwise free to go by law enforcement or otherwise can go under Georgia law or something to that effect, so that the police officer has the opportunity to do an investigation, and so that the other party to the accident, assuming there is another party, has the benefit of having insurance information just like they would if there were two driven cars, driven by human beings that were involved in an accident. The other issue kind of gets down in the weeds, and it's back on the insurance issue that Chairman Kelly was talking about, and that deals with insurance, and specifically the self-insured. In Georgia law, there's a code section in the insurance code that talks about how you get self-insurance and what the procedures are that you have to go through to become self-insured. There is no limit in that code section. So typically when we talk about, well, you're self-insured pursuant to the limits of some other code section. So I would suggest that whatever the magic number is that the committee arrives at, that self-insurance language contain a reference to whatever that number is. It may be to a code section, it may be a number. I'm glad to give specific suggested language, but it sounds like that language may be a little bit in flux, so it may be premature for me to suggest language. I'm glad to answer any questions, and I know Mr. Potter is as well.
All right, thank you. So primarily the issues is the accident itself, making sure that the vehicle's there, stays there, provides the necessary information to the law enforcement officers. And going back to the insurance question about self-insurance, so I'm assuming since you're not currently writing a policy on this, the companies that would be involved would be self-insured.
Yes,
they would be providing self-insurance. We would have to make sure that's tight in the law. And one of the reasons I think that Representative Kelly and Chairman Setzler and others have it drafted this way is to try to make sure the people who are utilizing these vehicles on our roads are the General Motors and the Googles and the Ubers and the large companies for now until the technology is perfected. But we'll definitely need to make sure that's taken care of. And I believe Chairman Setzler.
I appreciate your presentation. I appreciate your involvement in this process. I would say to every one of your remarks you made, I think is under consideration. I think we're looking at here revision 6 or 7. I think we're somewhere, Representative Kelly, on revision 8 we're working on, that it's got the language you referred to on the 270 sections, the duty to remain on site and report in accordance with the required lawful standards. I think that's being discussed right now, and some updates. So,
Okay.
I think all of the above are appreciated, and I appreciate that. I think your impact. I think the details you laid out is very helpful in terms of the way forward. I think that's the direction we're going.
Thank you. I would indicate that in one of those 270s, and this is just part of the complexity of this, it refers to the driver shall in every event stay at the scene of the accident. And that's just different with a driverless vehicle. So that's just part of the equation that makes this complex.
Sure.
Thank you, Chairman Setzler. Number 6, I'm not sure who that, Representative Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, that is an interesting dilemma, that there's no driver B or A to testify to the police officer. Do these vehicles have, or is there a plan by the manufacturers, and to your knowledge, to have any kind of recording device, a dash cam, a black box of operations, or?
We'll for certain there is, but we would have to defer to people who are experts, because I think we've said all the terms we know about that.
Okay.
And Representative Cox, I will tell you that we do have some folks, I believe, that are going to come up from the manufacturer that may know the answer.
But there is bound to be that, and then part of that question will be who has access to it and when.
All right, Representative Williams.
That just raised a question in my mind. Even today, where you do have insurance, where you have a dual fatality, nobody's there to tell you anything. And then you go through the investigation and you're able to get the questions answered. So I don't find that as a big problem, because you've been doing that for years, investigating accidents where no witnesses survived.
Well, if in the event that occurs, now suppose it has, the vehicles are at least on site, and accident reconstruction experts will be present, and the police officer will be present, take measurements and do all those things. And then if it's a 2-car accident with 2 deaths, you'd be correct in that, from that perspective, it's a witnessless accident.
What about the old show where the car did everything and you can just walk up and say, "Hey, Mac, what happened?" and the car will tell you.
We may be getting there.
And I think we may hear some of that in a minute, Representative Williams, where this car does record all the data and will be able to serve as a more reliable witness, I think, many times than a human driver in the car. Anything else to add?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. All right, next, I think we have Bill Clark, Georgia Trial Lawyers. If you would just come up, give us your name for the record and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Bill Clark on behalf of the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. I'll cut right to the chase. Our concern here is who are we going to hold liable as a state? Who's going to be held liable when these human-created entities inevitably go astray? When there is a wreck, who is to be liable? Under current law, it is the operator of the vehicle. You, me, the driver of the vehicle. And we have a definition in our code for operator, and that's one who is either driving or in actual physical control of the vehicle. Nobody is going to have physical control of these vehicles. So that statutory definition is going to have to change to incorporate non-physical control of a vehicle. It's going to be controlled by hardware and software that somebody has put in the vehicle. And so how do we decide who that is, who's responsible for this particular crash? Is it XYZ company who first built the car? Is it PDQ company that added the automated driving system to it? Is it the ride-sharing company that has an app and they're the ones who put the car out into the marketplace and perhaps own it? Or is it an individual who owns it? These are not simple questions. They're very complicated questions. And before the state makes a decision where that liability is to land, these questions have to be explored. I want to join the chorus of complimenting Representative Setzler, Chairman Setzler, because he has really been wrestling with these issues. And about 2 hours ago, a group of about 6 or 8 of us, including Representative Setzler, thought we had come up with language to address our main concern. How do you figure out who is operating? What is operating of one of these vehicles? And I can tell you the only thing I've managed to do in this whole discussion is bring everybody together in one consensus. And that is that the language we drafted is awful. Very ineffective. No disrespect to anyone other than 6 or 8 of us trying in a short time frame to come up with short answers to very complicated issues. And Chairman Setzler tried to push all of us to come up with the right language we thought we had. We then reached back out to all of our respective clients and contacts, and universally they said that doesn't accomplish the problem, doesn't solve the problem, and in fact may be counterproductive to the collective effort. So we're going to keep working at it on behalf of the trial lawyers to help the state come up with the right public policy so that our citizens who inevitably will be harmed, albeit in, we hope, considerably fewer numbers than are harmed in current traffic fatalities and accidents around the state, but those who are harmed need to have an opportunity for recourse to hold someone responsible if that someone caused the accident that the person was involved in. I'm glad to answer any questions that I can, Mr. Chairman, but I really appreciate your approach in either trying to work through this bill or being prepared to spend the next 2 or 3 weeks trying to work on perfecting whatever your colleagues in the Senate may send to you.
All right, thank you, Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clark, again, I think we were in agreement that the particular language was not great language as we were trying to wrestle with. I would say this, I think this is the carry away from members of the committee. The central point in all this is that the company, the owner, the entity that owns the vehicle and puts the vehicle on the road, makes it available for service, is the single point of accountability for everything it does and fails to do. That is one very clear thing that everybody from Representative Kelly throughout this entire process are crystal clear about. Everything the vehicle does or fails to do is the singular responsibility of the company that puts it out there. You know, a lot of the bills we wrestle with here, people are trying to indemnify themselves and cover this angle and that angle, be it General Motors, Uber, Google, or their affiliates, have all been resolute in we own everything the vehicle does and fails to do. That is crystal clear, and that provides some great simplicity for us as a committee. And that's without qualification. They own everything in the rules of the road. They own everything in terms of requirements for safety. That is crystal clear from a policy standpoint. The thing that Mr. Clark speaks to is how we draft the language, the particular language, to accomplish that without unintended consequences. Is that fair, Mr. Clark?
That is one of the considerations. I would take a half step back and not challenge the initial statement, but point out to you that it is a dramatic change in the public policy of this state. Right now, ownership of a vehicle is almost irrelevant to who is liable for an accident. The accident liability lands under current law with the operator of the vehicle, the driver of the vehicle. So who is driving one of these quote-unquote self-driving vehicles for purposes of liability ought to be the focus of the committee and the legislature as we go forward.
All right, thank you. Any other questions of Bill, Mr. Clark? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
I believe we have Nick from Uber here to speak next. And Mr. Massey. If you would just give us your full name and who you represent, please.
Thank you, Chairman Tanner. Lewis Massey, our firm has the honor of representing Uber. And just want to start out by thanking you and Chairman Kelly, Chairman Harold, Chairman Setzler for the time they've spent with us. Nick Giuliano is here from Uber. He represents Uber in the Southeast. He's the public affairs manager for Uber in the Southeast, but he lives right here in Georgia. From the outset, our desire has been to talk through all these issues to see if there might be a light regulatory structure that would allow technology companies and manufacturers to take a strong look at Georgia and creating jobs and opportunities here. So we appreciate the time that y'all spent with us. We think it's moving in the right direction and appreciate all the time that you've spent. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nick.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the members of the committee. Self-driving vehicles and autonomous vehicle technology is really exciting stuff, and it has the chance to remake the way that not only we in this room and everybody else get around, but the way that our goods and services move across the state and ultimately across the world. So within that context, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Uber right now on self-driving and talk about anything that kind of arises from that, and then get into the particulars of this bill and our view on public policy on this issue generally. You know, right now, when we talk about where this technology is and how good it is, if you're in Pittsburgh right now and you take out your phone and you open your Uber app, and if you're a small subsection of people that this has been opened up to, which just folks in the general public who use Uber a lot, you will see an icon in your app for an autonomous vehicle to actually come to you and pick you up and take you to your destination. And as of last week, that program was expanded to Tempe, Arizona, with the thanks and gratitude to Governor Doug Ducey there, who worked with us to bring that to his state as well. Now, there's a safety driver at the wheel, meaning that there's a professional driver sitting right there so that if there's an incident, some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, they can grab the wheel. And there's an engineer sitting in the passenger seat who is monitoring all of the systems that are at play here. But this technology is good today, and it's only going to continue to get better. And these are actually on the road and commercially available in some places. There was a reference made earlier to the Anheuser-Busch delivery of beer across the state of Colorado. That was done by our company in partnership with Anheuser-Busch. It was funny, there was a beer delivery that was the first truck delivery across the state, but we're proud of that accomplishment. This particular legislation began in the form of what's called the SAVE Act. It's legislation that's been introduced in about half dozen state legislatures right now. And in its earlier form, we had a lot of concerns with it, and we went to Representative Kelly and many others in the room who spent a lot of time with us, and Representative Setzler and Harold, who sat down with us, and we talked about what type of approach makes sense. In its original form, the legislation said that a vehicle manufacturer and only a vehicle manufacturer can do self-driving technology. Well, that means that folks like us and Waymo and pretty much anybody who's not an auto manufacturer will be crowded out of this space, and we're very happy that those revisions are, that those provisions are out, and now we have a bill that the language is still moving forward on, that we're having a good hard look at, and we appreciate all the hard work that's been done on it. I'll say at the highest level, our ask to y'all as policymakers and the careful consideration that I think we have based on what other states have done on this is that consistency from state to state is just so key. If Georgia goes one direction and passes a set of laws that say X, Y, and Z, and Tennessee to our north passes something that's different, and Florida down south of us actually already has a statute, they're one of just a few that have actually incorporated something, it says something, and South Carolina says it, you get the idea. If states disagree on the way that this technology is to be treated, then that's going to mean that, that there's broad implications to our transportation infrastructure, and there's broad implications, frankly, to the competitive environment. If you look at where our company has chosen to invest its time and resources and put these vehicles on the road, it's been in places that actually don't and have not adopted a statutory framework for the express reason that it's really hard to say, what do you want to incorporate in statute at this time? We heard a bunch of good questions earlier about how this technology works. What is this? What is this? You know, how in depth do we want to get here? And I think it's hard to anticipate what direction technology is going to go and then pass regulations that don't crowd that out, or you get the idea there. It's hard to tell what this technology will look like tomorrow. To that exact point, there was testimony here in this state this morning on this bill, and then several hours later there was testimony in Tennessee on a bill that had that provision from General Motors saying that only auto manufacturers in the state of Tennessee should be able to deploy the technology. So we're seeing different levels from state to state. So with that in mind, I'm happy to open it up to questions from the committee, and I'm happy to talk about anything that we're doing here.
All right. I know there's, and Representative Williams already alluded to, there's a lawyer in every situation.
Absolutely.
But I know there's been some conversation by some of the folks involved in this that under current Georgia law, it was open and people could go out and do this now. And there's General Motors and others don't believe that's what Georgia law says. I've asked for an opinion from our legislative counsel, who also disagrees with that statement that under current law that you can operate on Georgia roads in an autonomous fashion. So I think that decision will ultimately be decided in the courts when one of these vehicles are involved in an accident and someone's prosecuted and the courts make that decision. But I think there's a risk under current law that you don't have that ability now. I think what this committee is trying to do is to develop some framework to protect, to allow you to continue to advance the technology, but to set a framework to protect public safety, which is what our concern is, I think, here on this committee. I believe we have a question from Chairman Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate that comment. One of the most important things about that is that with emergent technology such as this, we have to be cooperative. We have to, and we've all talked about having a model that works for all, and therefore we're going to have to all work together to put a safe product in the marketplace that the citizens will benefit from. Our speakers earlier from the insurance industry spoke about proprietary data that the various companies would prefer not to share, and how do we get data at an accident scene and how is that reported. Serving on a number of committees in the House gives me an opportunity to interface with different companies from different points of view. Many in Georgia believe Uber is subject to a current transportation sales tax, which Uber has not been paying to the best of our ability to understand, and has not been cooperative, and is currently emailing me in opposition to a new piece of legislation coming out of Ways and Means that would try to address the issue of Uber cooperating with other transportation providers in Georgia that are taxed. So I guess I just have a little pause moving forward with an innovative system trying to get manufacturers, technology companies to play in this emerging marketplace, knowing that the level of communication and cooperation to make this successful in Georgia is going to be a very high standard. And I need assurance from you that your firm is going to be a cooperative member as we move forward in all aspects of doing business in Georgia.
Representative Harrell, I appreciate the comments, and happy to speak with you further regarding the other measure as well. With regard again to this bill, we are one of the interested parties who's had to look at it, but we take no position on this bill at this time. I think that you'll find from the places where we've deployed this technology and the places where we have our fleets on the road there that we've been good partners with local government, and that we are very committed to providing the safe deployment of this technology.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Talking about other locations, you currently use this technology in other states, correct? Your company?
We do, sir.
And how advanced is it in these other states? Just give us an example of what you're currently involved in another state and how advanced that is.
Sure, it's pretty good. So with regard to self-driving technology and full autonomy and how that all works, what we currently have are vehicles that require for input from a human driver during different situations. So the type of fully autonomous vehicle that is being contemplated by this legislation is not the self-driving vehicle that we have on the roads right now. And I think that that's the wise decision to take this, right? Like if the state is going to go in the direction of prescribing public policy on this, we need to be having a look at fully autonomous vehicles and not situations where you have a safety driver who's right there. In some of the scenarios that were outlined earlier, we talked about the idea of a deer, you're on a road and the deer drops out. One really interesting thing about this technology is that it's based, at least for a lot of our work, on heat sensing technology. So I've been in these in Pittsburgh on the road, and we had some folks from the city of Atlanta who came up for a pilot with us. And there was a scenario where I was in a vehicle and we came to a stop at an intersection even though it was a green light. And I was thinking, why did we just stop at this green light? Well, it turned out that from a building on my left, there was a car that was running a red light. We couldn't see it. The vehicle couldn't see it optically, but what it did is it picked up on the heat signature from that engine block, and it calculated very, very quickly that that vehicle was traveling so fast that it was going to run the red light. So these vehicles receive points of input and amounts of data that we as just human beings, we don't have. They're very, very, very far beyond where we are, and I think we'll see that progress.
So currently in that scenario, you're saying a safety driver, are they actually behind the wheel and they could take back control of the vehicle currently?
They can, yes. In that scenario, the vehicle did it itself.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Massey, anything to add? All right, thank you. All right, next we have Eric Henning with General Motors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and I'd also like to thank Chairman Setzler and Chairman Harrell for all their work on this. My name is Eric Henning. I'm from General Motors Company. GM is interested in deploying these vehicles in Georgia. We are currently testing 50 vehicles in San Francisco, Arizona, and Michigan now. I do want to clarify a couple things. The original language was not inclusive of tech companies, but we have told them multiple times over the last several weeks, both here and in Tennessee, that we're happy to include them. The testimony that was mentioned in Tennessee today was not on a bill. It was just on automated vehicles in general, so it was not testifying on a bill today. So we view the same as Ledge Council, that for us to deploy vehicles here, the rules of the road need to be changed. Certain rules of the road, not all of them, but those that basically contemplate having a human in the driver's seat. And I know we've worked closely with Chairman Setzler on this, trying to work through what it is you really need to change. We had a very short list, actually, of what the things we thought could be taken care of to allow us to deploy the vehicles. But without changing those things, we don't believe we can deploy vehicles here. So we have several states where they're a target. Georgia is one of the states. We're looking in probably the next couple of years to do that. It's a similar to what Nick was explaining with Uber. We have a safety operator, and I don't know if some of you have received a video. There's a couple videos that are out there more recently on YouTube. It's Cruise Automation, which is a company we purchased about a year ago to help us accelerate our autonomous vehicle program. The first video basically shows the car being called by an app,
It's a 22-minute ride, but it's in 2.5 minutes that it goes over. It's sped up. Shows bicycles cutting in front, pedestrians jaywalking, cars cutting in front, shows cars double park waiting for oncoming traffic, then it goes around it. So the second video is a little bit longer drive, same kind of thing, but it has an inset showing the safety operator's hands never touching the wheel. And in both those trips, they never touched the wheel of the car. It's kind of amazing, and especially when you watch the wheel turn and the hands are just sitting down there. So again, we look forward to working through this process. I'm not sure what draft we're on or what's in it, so I'm not really sure what the comments would be. I know we're trying to work through all these different issues. We want to see this process move forward so we can have a path to deploying these vehicles. So with that, I'd take questions.
Thank you. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but just in the conversations that I've had with you, it seems like you're just interested in making sure we have the rules of the road correct and we have a clear path for you to be able to operate in Georgia, not as much concerned about what level the insurance requirements are and that type.
That's correct. Okay. That's correct. And what was mentioned about, I think on the accident reporting and the leaving the scene of an accident, we don't have an issue with correcting that. That was not an intention from our perspective.
And speaking on that, I'm assuming the idea here is, and again, like Chairman Setzler said, a lot of this is we kind of know what direction we're wanting to go. It's a matter of getting words on paper so that Lake Council can draft it in legal form. But I'm assuming the idea would be if one of these vehicles is in an accident, the vehicle would stay there. The officer would be notified through that electronic notification to 911 that there's been a wreck at this location. When the officer got there, they'd work the accident, and that in the law we would have that car, that manufacturer, the owner would provide whatever data that the law enforcement needed for that accident. Is that?
Yeah, and I think the idea is to make sure that there still has to be a report that's filled out by whoever's responsible, in this case, the owner of the vehicle. And, the vehicle's going to have to carry registration, whether it's a paper or electronic. In the case of us, you'd have a button that the officer could push and actually talk to a live person, and so they could interact with them. I would mention one other thing, the black box issue that kind of came up. These vehicles, your current car already has a black box in it, and it's already governed by federal law. And access to it, insurance companies can have access to it if they subpoena the information. The information is owned by the consumer. So there is access that is already granted to that. I can't tell you, I think location, speed, things like that are in there. There's a certain time period in there. I don't know how long it actually records the data, but you also have to remember there's a huge amount of data that is going to be recorded on these vehicles as it goes through, because they're going to continue to learn. So I've heard, and this is not from us, but I've heard one industry standard say that it's 1 terabit of data per hour. So it's an incredible amount of data that these vehicles are going to be generating.
So again, would not be opposed to having it clear in the law that the vehicle owner, occupant, driver would provide the necessary information for law enforcement to complete an accident report.
But I think that's already would be required. As long as you don't get an exemption from it, I think that's required.
Right. Yeah. I guess my only thought would be once you move to a totally autonomous, and if you work an accident, you're interviewing a witness, asking them what happened. You can't.
Yeah. So, you raise a good question because that came up earlier. And actually, my former life, I was president of an insurance trade association, so I am somewhat familiar with the insurance business. Typically, Representative, you brought up do both people die? Well, if both people are there and they both tell different stories, that's pretty typical. So what happens is the police come and they actually interview both. They make a determination as who's at fault. However, the insurance company may take that into consideration, but they make their own determination who's at fault. So that process is still going to work the same. That's not going to change.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I believe that was our last speaker that has, yes, go. Come on up to the mic and tell us your name and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chris Carpenter. I'm here representing Waymo Google. And we'd also like to say how much we appreciate Representative Kelly Mr. Chairman Harrell and Chairman Setzler on how much work they did on this issue. I just want to point out, we actually thought we were closer on this issue this morning than we are today, or right now. In fact, the gap has just gotten much wider. The more people got involved, the more issues have been raised. And this is kind of the Pandora's box that we cautioned at the outset here. This is new technology. And the one thing that we don't want the state to do is put their finger on the scale where they're directing where this technology may go, where we have some ideas. We're all testing projects. Google's in 4 states, Uber's in several states. Incidentally, Google's also only in states where there is no regulatory framework, again, because we don't want the regulatory framework to dictate where the technology may travel. So we want to point out caution. We don't want to put a big sign up that says, you know what, we have this regulatory framework in Georgia, we want you to come here, but it has the opposite reaction, that actually the incentive is not to come. We really do appreciate all the hard work that's going in here, and we are committed to continue working on these issues, but we do want to point out that as more people have gotten more involved, Bill Clark, God love him, the response to his language was universal, and we're not sure that we can answer all these questions in this short period of time. And so we want to ask your diligence and your caution before we put something out here that actually can cause great detriment to the state of Georgia in the technology sphere.
All right, thank you. And I know, speaking for me personally, and I believe I can speak for the subcommittee, as I've talked to them numerous times on this issue, I think it's been their desire to, number one, to protect public safety and to make sure that the public safety of the citizens of Georgia is protected as we advance technology, but do that only to the point that we have to, and then allow the technology to grow and to develop and to be competitive here in the state so that we can be a leader in this area in Georgia. But we always have to put at the very forefront of all of that the protection of our citizens and public safety. Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your involvement in this over the last several years. A couple questions. First of all, would you kind of outline Waymo Google's commitment to really owning what happens with these vehicles and really taking full responsibility without qualification?
Well, as we discussed, we understand that in order for this technology to be adopted and accepted by the public, that we need to accept full responsibility for what happens with our product. And as we discussed, and I remember that conversation we had, and that includes some form of criminal responsibility. We understand that we're going to have to stand behind our products, and we're not shirking from that whatsoever. Now, there are issues of modification liability, all these other things, and then the sticky wicket that Mr. Clark has opened up that can really confuse the issue. But no, we understand that we have to accept full responsibility for our products in order for the public to be willing to adopt them.
And is it fair to say that, given the Chapter 40-6 rules of the road and the Chapter 40-8 safety requirements, you all, I think is it fair to interpret that you all are comfortable with stepping up and delivering on all of those as they stand today without us writing rules? It's got to do this, it's got to do that. I think you'd rather say we can do what the law requires of a person today, in essence.
Absolutely. Before we enter a state, there's tremendous amount of due diligence needs to be done, just uploading all the rules of the road, all the circumstances, and so we're not going to enter into a state without having that completely worked out and tested and verified, and so that's in part why this technology is slowly being rolled out in states, and it is coming. But the real question is ripeness. When is it right for this issue to be considered here in Georgia? Even GM testified that this is a couple of years from now. And so we all are interested in testing, and we are all interested we're excited about this technology. What we're concerned about is any time that you think, well, you know what, this is how we answer and deal with this issue, it causes 10 more issues down the road. And we don't want those issues to influence the direction the technology may develop and evolve.
Right. So it is fair to say that you guys would rather step up to the plate and deliver on what the requirements are, the rules of the road, without any prescriptions because you think you can mirror the human behavior better than you can meet some rules that can be made up and established.
Absolutely. And again, in all respect to Legislative Council, our attorneys are telling us that we can operate here today. In fact, there is a pilot project the City of Atlanta is operating right now without any legislation or anything.
Thank you.
On that pilot project, you still have a driver in the car. They're just not controlling the vehicle, but they can take over the vehicle if need be.
It's not our pilot project, but City of Atlanta, but that's my understanding, yes,
That's
sir.
mine also. It's not a fully autonomous vehicles.
I don't believe so.
Thank you. All right. Representative Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just interested in the nature of I guess it's prohibitive language currently in our code. Does it speak to fully autonomous vehicles, or does it speak to the driver sitting around and will grab the wheel? And I don't know that I need an answer or can get one from anybody, but if Legislative Council could maybe just shoot me an email on the language, I'd just be interested in seeing what we, as a body right now, perceive to be prohibitive language in the code that would keep these folks out of our state right now.
And I will tell you, multiple lawyers, you'll get multiple opinions, and there are several opinions out there.
And I will tell you, Representative Cox, because there's different opinions even among the folks here speaking. Google feels one way, General Motors feels one way, because General Motors has indicated they're wanting to come into Georgia, but their attorneys tell them that they can't. Legislative Council, I think she can correct me if I'm wrong, is where it talks about the driver. There's an anticipation there's a driver in a vehicle. And that's why I think we may be able to skate by legally. And again, Legislative Council can correct me, because even with the current pilot, you still have a driver in the car. There's still a person sitting behind the wheel of the car. They're operating autonomously, but they're still in the car. There's features on a lot of our cars today, whether it be a backup, the ability to back up and park, that are somewhat autonomous. But what we're looking at is when we go, is it called level 5, I believe?
Level 4,
level
5,
4 and 5, fully autonomous, no driver in the car's completely controlling itself, that there's this inference in the law in numerous places that there's a driver. I think that's the issue, Chairman Sessler.
And to your point, the argument, and again, this is I think an important point to communicate. The argument would be from a company like the one that Mr. Carpenter represents, is if you follow the definitions in Title 40, everything goes back to person. Driver is defined as a person that this, and it operator, person that does that. They all track back to person in Title 40-1-1, and person's defined as a natural person or corporation or any a corporate entity. So the definition of person, as it stands, a corporation, I think a very direct argument goes that under existing law, because it all tracks back to that one definition, that a corporation could be the driver, and if their equipment's operating without a human passenger, the argument is it's a very clear direction of kind of connect the dots that exists today. No, I'm not going to opine on that. I'm simply saying it is a very credible argument to make. I think our GDOT is conditionally persuaded in that, but I think the question is, can we provide clarity to that issue once and for all?
We agree. Thank you.
Representative Watson.
I just wanted to make one comment representing the number one industry in the state, which is agriculture. We've been doing this on the farm for 15, 20 years. So I'm glad to see that we're having this conversation as a state. So I appreciate everybody's work on this.
Thank you, Representative. All right. I think there's no other questions. Thank you. I think the posture of the committee has to be that this is a work in progress. One of the things that we don't want to do is move legislation through this committee that is not perfected and ready to the standard that we want to have it. So we've listened to testimony. We know we've had several subcommittee meetings, and I will stand at the pleasure of the subcommittee if they want to get back together and continue to work on this. The other opportunity we have is there is another bill coming through the Senate. It's my understanding that bill's in rules. That bill more than likely, not trying to be negative on the Senate, but they often move legislation and leave it up to us to fix it. So there's legislation that's coming over from the Senate more than likely. And if it'll come to, and when it comes to this committee, that'll give us some additional time. But again, want to make sure we get it right. All right, having no other business, we are adjourned.